Hi, I'm Ben Ferguson, and welcome to your AMAC Weekly News. First up, one of our favorite socialists in Congress, AOC, has decided that once the country reopens, the best move for Americans is to refuse to return to work. She says this while she is getting paid a full salary to stay at home and, I guess, kind of not work as a U.S. congressman. More on that in just a moment. Also, liberals are using the pandemic to try and change the way that we vote. In fact, they want you to mail in a vote so that you don't have to show any ID. They claim it's a more robust system and it would be something that would be great for America. So why is it in the coronavirus bailout package? Find out more about that in just a moment. And finally, we are joined by our own AMAC representative to update you on the impacts of COVID-19 and our members and benefits that you may be able to enjoy. All that and more in just a moment. But a quick reminder, please share this video with your family and friends on social media. Your AMAC Weekly News starts right now. As usual, AOC is now encouraging Americans to completely rely on the government. How is she doing it this time? Well, apparently, after America reopens, she seems to think that Americans should stay home and refuse to go to work. That's right. Rather than returning to work to start getting a paycheck again, AOC is encouraging every American to literally protest working because she claims right now it's unfair to work. Now, this is something you have to see to believe. Watch this from an interview she did on Vice TV.
There's a lot that we could be doing right now, but ultimately, I think when we talk about this idea of reopening society, only in America does the president, when the president tweets about liberation, does he mean go back to work? When we, have this discussion about going back or reopening, I think a lot of people should just say, no, we're not going back to that. We're not going back to working 70-hour weeks just so that we could put food on the table and not even feel any sort of semblance of security in our lives.
So let me get this straight. AOC thinks that working a lot during the week is unfair to Americans. So now she wants Americans to be broke and refuse to go to work at all. That means everyone would be reliant on the government for their paycheck. That plays right into the hands of those pushing this socialist agenda, doesn't it? Even more than that, she's sitting at home still receiving her six-figure paycheck put forth by the American taxpayers, while more than 26 million Americans have lost their jobs due to the coronavirus pandemic. Now, the conservative-led Senate has made the decision to return to session on Monday, May the 4th. At the same time, House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer decided to cancel plans to bring House lawmakers back to work at the Capitol, but they're still getting their paycheck. Yes, this shows the vast difference between the two parties in power. Conservatives understand the risk, but they also know that work is required by our leaders in order to protect Americans. On the other hand, you have liberals in the House deciding that they are too scared to help Americans and are going to continue to sit at home and get paid their full salary by us, the taxpayers. Now, at the end of the day, the power is in our hands to decide who remains in these decision-making seats in Congress. It's an election year, and it's time for us to make sure that our voices are being heard on Capitol Hill, and AMAC is helping you do that right now. There's one thing that is for sure. The left, and specifically liberals in Congress, are determined to not let the coronavirus crisis go to waste. In fact, rather than focusing on assisting Americans during this crisis, their eyes are on the election in November. Speaker Nancy Pelosi is now promising to push funding for a more robust vote-by-mail system in the next coronavirus stimulus package. Yes, you heard me correctly. She wants to put a large portion of the funds in the next stimulus package towards growing vote by mail, which has nothing to do with coronavirus. Now, she flat out said this in an interview on MSNBC's Morning Joe. How did she support her decision to do this? This is not a joke. She decided to blame the Russians. Take a look at this from MSNBC.
It cannot be denied. No matter what the president says, it cannot be denied. But it takes us to the next step. They've also told us 24/7 the Russians are still at work trying to undermine our election. That's why we have to have an important chunk of money in this next bill that will enable us to have protect the integrity of our elections, as well as enable the American people to vote by mail, especially at this time of a health danger in going to the polls.
Just so you know, Nancy Pelosi and the left have already tried to force conservatives in Congress to put this provision, this insane provision, into the previous coronavirus stimulus bills, and they're not letting up. Pelosi is now claiming that the reason why Donald Trump doesn't want this because he, quote, doesn't have a winning message to share with the American people. So in order to protect the, quote, life of our democracy, we apparently should make it easier to commit voter fraud. On April 3rd, Pelosi tweeted that vote by mail was, quote, essential in the midst of this pandemic. She wrote, vote by mail is essential to protecting the future of our democracy as we confront this public health crisis. There is no legitimate argument against enacting it. Well, there are many legitimate arguments against enacting this. How about the fact that it will make election fraud so easy, thus making our elections less secure and less reliable? I think that's a legitimate argument. I also think it's a legitimate argument to say that we already have enough trouble keeping our elections safe as it is. Now she wants to include the votes passing through multiple hands before they ever reach their destination. Now, thankfully, conservatives have been holding strong. Not only that, but she is also pushing for free broadband for everyone that you would have to pay for. So let me recap this. Apparently, it's more important than doctors, hospitals, hospital patients, and even getting a vaccine. She's saying money must be going to an election by mail process, and she's demanding free broadband for anyone and everyone in this country. Now, there isn't even a stipulation in her idea that would differentiate between citizens and illegals in our country either. Well, we cannot let COVID-19 be an excuse for liberals to try and trash our election system and attempt to steal an election and give more free stuff that we as a country clearly right now cannot afford to give out. We must continue to support our men and women in Washington fighting for our rights to have a free and fair election. Each week here on AMAC Weekly News, we like to take a moment to get you information directly from AMAC about what we're doing on Capitol Hill and around the country. Joining me now is the Senior Vice President of AMAC Action, Andy Mangione. Nice to have you with us. And I want to start with this bailout package that Nancy Pelosi is trying to use for anything but COVID-19 response. Specifically, she's now advocating for changing the way that our elections are run by saying, voting for the president this coming November, you should just be able to do it all by mail. Forget anybody showing up to a polling place and having to prove who they are as an individual. Let me first get your reaction to that, because I see this could become a huge problem for the integrity of the election.
Without question, Ben, this is a serious, serious issue. And keep in mind, she tried to do this in phase 3 of the COVID-19 relief bill when she was advocating for ballot harvesting, mail-in voting. So this is not surprising that Nancy Pelosi is pushing for this again. But let's take a look at the potential harm mail-in voting could do to the integrity of the election. The propensity or the potential for fraud is enormous. People showing up right now, with the way Democrats push back and showing a voter ID, I don't understand how they can connect the dots between a clean election by mail versus screaming and yelling about people showing IDs when they vote in person. It doesn't make sense in terms of the damage that this can do to the integrity of our elections. Doesn't surprise me, don't get me wrong, but it's a serious, serious challenge to a foundational aspect of our representative republic.
And to use a talking point of Nancy Pelosi, when they were obsessed over the fake story of Russia and having all this interference in our last election, and talking about we have to do everything to protect the integrity of American elections, which, by the way, I agree with. Fundamentally, we should protect the integrity. why would you then advocate for this unless there's a clear political reason? And it's not about people liking you. It's about the opportunity to gain some sort of advantage by saying you don't have to show up to the polls. And again, this also has nothing to do with COVID-19 relief spending or help to the American people. This is about Democrats using this pandemic to try to give them an edge in the next election, which is something they've been claiming they're totally against.
And Ben, absolutely right. Unrelated policy. What does this have to do with controlling the virus and keeping people safe? They will tell you that it's safer if people mail in their ballots rather than go stand on top of each other at the polls. But we know that we can social distance come the fall if we have to. They can set up these voting machines. They can set up the little voting booths 6 feet away from each other. That can all be managed quite easily. We've all been there before. These are usually held in gymnasiums with tons of space or auditoriums. So this is unrelated to the coronavirus itself. It's advantageous policy, it's wish list thinking, and it harms, and you're absolutely right. We have to protect our precious right to vote and the way that it's conducted to ensure fair and safe elections in this country. It's just a guise for them meaning Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats, to reacquire their power. And none of this should be surprising. It's upsetting, but unsurprising.
I want to pivot to something else that AMAC Action is really focusing on. And for people that are watching right now, AMAC Action is the advocacy arm of AMAC. And this is where we are fighting for you every day, statewide and nationwide, on important issues. And one of the issues that I know you want to bring a big red flag to right now is this issue of all of a sudden you have a lot of governors and a lot of states who are saying, we need a government bailout from the COVID-19 pandemic. But if you look at what's really going on, this is nothing more than a bailout for their bad decision makings at the state level for decades.
But without question, the president was right on when he said, why should we bail out poorly run states? This is, again, taking advantage of a crisis to enrich their states, particularly their pensions. These pensions have been, I feel bad for these folks that are receiving these pensions. At the state that I live in Kentucky, their pensions is in tremendously bad shape. And people aren't going to get what they were promised if they don't reform pensions, but no one so far has had the guts to do so. So you see governors in some of these blue states seizing an opportunity to take a federal bailout to make up for their poorly run states and their poor management decisions when it came to their pensions. That's what's driving this, Ben, are the public pensions that are going broke. And unfortunately, it's the pensioner that's going to feel the sting of this.
One other thing, Andy, that I think is also important to talk about is the president's overall response. One of the things that many on the left like to kick him around for is saying he's obsessed with being in charge. He's obsessed with being the loudest voice in the room. He's obsessed with being in charge of things that he doesn't know about. Yet, he did the complete opposite of all those criticisms by coming out with a blueprint to open the country back up, but making it very clear that this is going to be the governor's decision and the local municipalities on how to implement it and how each state opens up each state, because he understood not only the issue of states' rights, but he also understood you guys can manage what you're dealing with at ground zero with COVID-19 much better than we can from the White House, which is typical Washington form, right? Dictate to the people like Nancy Pelosi does. Dictate to the people how it's going to happen. The president didn't do that. And then the media freaked out on him saying, well, why aren't you doing your job, Mr. President? I mean, can you have it both ways here?
Yeah, they're going to try to twist and contort themselves to have it both ways. But you're absolutely right. From day one, the president delegated. He followed the Constitution. And that's one of the things that AMAC members responded to, because we're polling them constantly on the job the president is doing on a whole host of coronavirus-related issues. And they've been consistently in favor of how the president has handled this situation, particularly following the Constitution, delegating to the states to have them run their individual states. This is not a top-down approach. This is a constitutional approach to managing this crisis. And not only that, Ben, he's also he's already unveiled a blueprint for testing, comprehensive testing to expand states' capacity to allow them to reopen faster with the testing they need to give people confidence, to keep them healthy, and to give them the confidence they need to restart their lives, go back to work, worship together, engage in social situations. And it's something that's been sorely missing for the past several weeks. I think the president, and our members will acknowledge this, has been very accommodating to states, to governors, and to states' rights.
Well, it's certainly important that the president understands how the governors can do the job probably better than anybody else, and every state is different. And like you said, he followed the Constitution. For people that are watching right now, this conversation we just had is exactly why it's so important that you are a member of AMAC, and if you haven't joined, that you join, because AMAC action and what Andy is talking about right now are the exact issues that we are fighting on day in and day out to make sure that your voice is being heard and that your tax dollars aren't being wasted on bailouts and things like broadband for all, which Nancy Pelosi is trying to get in the COVID bill, or any of these just absurd things that she's working on. So, Andy, I appreciate you coming back on. As always, great to see you.
Thank you, Ben. My pleasure.
Lastly, we at AMAC want to remind you about our benefits and discounts that we are giving to all of our members. We just added Teladoc Medicine from MeMD as one of the benefits. So if you have not joined AMAC or renewed your AMAC membership, do it right now so you can continue to receive these new benefits that we are rolling out on a weekly basis. We understand right now that people's budgets are tight, and at AMAC, we want to make sure that we maximize our benefits that we have for our members. So, again, make sure you renew your benefits right now or join AMAC. I'm Ben Ferguson. I'll see you back next week for our next episode.